All right. Hey, everybody. It is the 22nd of March, 2023, and this is Plutus PBL live coding from Gimbal Labs. We've got a project-based learning course for people who want to learn Cardano development that's currently live at plutuspbl.io. And we meet every Wednesday and Thursday at 14:30 UTC for these. These are called our live coding sessions. The agenda of every live coding session is always the same. We start with Q&A from anybody who's working through the course as a student. And then we always have a topic planned for discussion. Sometimes the topic will be a little bit more philosophical, like last week when we talked about wallet security. And other times the topic will be a hands-on deep dive, and this is why we call it live coding, into building some things together and doing some technical demonstrations, okay? Every one of these sessions is recorded, and the links are posted to the live coding page at Plutus PBL. And so if anybody can't find those links, just let us know, and we'll make sure to get them into your hands. So, hey, everybody, it's good to be here. Thank you for everybody who started the course so far. I checked this morning, it looks like 37 people are signed up so far within our first week and a half. And just for anybody who's thinking about jumping in, just know that you can start this course anytime, okay? The goal is to provide modules that people can move through at their own pace. And whenever you have questions, even if you know that at one of these live coding sessions, we're talking about topics that are a little bit beyond where you're at right now, it is always accepted and encouraged that you ask questions about anything, okay? So please, no matter where you are in the course, this is your time to ask questions and for us to dig in together. So without further ado, I wanted to open up the floor. If anybody has questions about the course and what you've been doing so far, that's where we'll start today's meeting. Juan, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I do have a question. Okay, I was playing with the meter and I had a situation trying to resources. I checked my system memory and RAM and physical memory, and they were okay. Although when I tried to install, it's always said that there were not enough memory, enough resources. So I don't know. That's a question to ask the developers, because what I did is I uninstalled another instance that I was playing with before, and it was actually stopped. It wasn't running while I was trying to run the actual one. But still, I uninstalled it and let the system alone, and reset, came back, and it installed well. So I don't know. It has to do with having at least only two instances working. I mean, or install on the system, and it didn't allow me to install the second one. Any thoughts about that?
So just in case people are learning Zoom, I want to point out that there's a reactions button at the bottom of my Zoom account, and I can do a thumbs up like this. And so just everybody who's had similar problems to what Juan is describing, give us a quick thumbs up so we know how broad a problem this is. Anybody else hit the resource limit on Demeter or use up all your credits so far? Yeah, I've been there too. And so I've been a little bit confused about this one myself. So two things on this. First of all, huge thank you to Juan for setting us up with a meeting with the Chief Operating Officer, Federico, from Demeter and from TX Pipe. We're going to meet tomorrow to talk about how the TX Pipe team can support everybody working through the Plutus PBL program to not have to either get a discount or to get free access to Demeter access. So that's really awesome. And Juan, thank you so much for pushing that. So we'll have updates The meeting will happen after live codings tomorrow. So by next week at the latest, I'll have something to share about Demeter access. But in the meantime, I ran into the same problem and I don't fully understand it, right? So we have to think about the two different computers that are running when we use Demeter. There's your own computer where you go to the web browser, you open up Demeter.run, and then there's the remote server that your Demeter instance is running on, right? And it seems like if you don't choose a powerful enough instance, right? We have two things we get to choose from, like the small, medium, and large Demeter instances, and then what network we're using. It appears that, like, I found that when I had a small instance, sometimes I was hitting the limit and getting that same error when I first tried to run Cabal REPL. But then I upgraded to a medium instance and I was still getting the error, and it seemed like it was happening because I had too many programs open on my own computer. And I don't know enough about how Demeter works to know how much that error is coming from my own device and how much is coming from the Demeter server. So I wish I had a better answer than that, but has anybody else had a chance to like look into how Demeter is working, or based on your experience, have you been able to tell if that resource error is coming from the remote server or from your own device? Yeah, it's an interesting one. Now, for most people who have run into this problem, the other suggestion in the Gimbal Labs Discord was, hey, just try running it again and it'll work after a few tries, right? And I've seen the truth of that. And so here, this is the funny thing, right? Let's really think about development at a high level. Demeter is very convenient. It's an incredible tool. And the fact that it saves us all the time of setting up an environment locally, right? Installing NICs, making sure that you can open up Plutus apps for the first time, and then running a project for the first time. There's no doubt that Demeter makes those steps easier. And as you'll see next week, it also comes with a fully synced Cardano node. Okay, so next week in module 102, you'll have a chance to start playing with Cardano CLI to create new addresses and to start building transactions. And it's really, really cool that you now have access to a fully synced node just by logging into Demeter, right? So why would somebody want to do these things locally on your own device? Why would I want to take the time to install NICs and Plutus apps or run my own Cardano node on my own computer, which is what we'll talk about next week? And part of it is, for me, there's less mystery, right? If I'm leaning on Demeter, I'm using a tool that I don't fully understand. And when this error happens, I ran out of resources. Personally, I don't know where that error is coming from. Is it on my device or on the Demeter server, right? When I do things locally, yeah, it's a little bit harder at first, but it's also much easier for me to diagnose when problems are happening, where it's coming from, right? This must be on my setup. So there's always going to be trade-offs to using these tools that make our lives easier. And that's something for all of us to think about, right? And even if you're using Demeter right now to get started, over the next few months, the Gimbal Labs team will continue to encourage you, if you have the resources, to run these programs locally, okay? Wish I had a shorter answer to that one, Juan, and like an easier way for us to snap our fingers, but this is kind of this is the beautiful point we're at, of understanding these trade-offs of simplicity versus full control.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, that brings a very good point, which is that sometimes what we do is not I mean, we can explore, we can ourselves do a little bit of troubleshooting, playing a little bit with it, instead of just posting and saying, please help me. That's what I did. I posted, help me. Nobody answered. So I said, gee, I gotta start doing it.
I'm still
So
on
I
that
started
journey.
right. So I started troubleshooting a little bit, and yeah, came up with an answer. But yeah, still interesting to know. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. What other questions do folks have? Harsha, hey.
Hey, so I'm trying to install Nix shell on my system, and I did install it, but then the make directories that we did before installing Nix shell, when I tried to cd into those directories, it just says these directories don't exist, and cabal ripple, it says the command doesn't, it doesn't recognize the command. Do you know what I need to do to move forward?
Yeah. So you were able to successfully install Nix, but you haven't gotten into a Nix shell yet.
I think so.
So okay.
My command line was Nix shell itself, because Nix develop and the other one weren't working.
Right.
So once that's done, the next step was cabal ripple, but
Yes.
that didn't work.
Excellent. Okay, so it sounds like you cloned the Plutus apps repo.
Yeah.
You checked out the appropriate branch, and within Plutus apps, you were able to get Nix shell running.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. That's the hardest part. Okay, so now that you're in that Nix shell, you can still navigate the directories on your computer. And you need to navigate to the PPBL 2023 Plutus template. Did you take that step?
Yeah.
Okay. And even there, it's saying.
Yeah. So even then it's saying this folder doesn't exist. So I was wondering if I close the terminal, I say install Nix shell and I close the terminal, what all steps should I redo every time I close the terminal and open it back up again? I didn't understand.
Do you have this running on your computer right now? This would be a great thing for us to look at together.
Yeah, I do.
Do you mind?
I closed it and I opened it. I'll share the screen.
Let's take a look. In this module and in module 102, there's a lot of things that we're going to do for the first time. And it's hard. As we've been building the course, it's hard for us to know how much to say. And so we've had some good conversations. But this is the most important part. When you, as a student working through this course, see these places that we get stuck, it'll always be good to hear about those. All right, so you're in.
So I closed it, but I think so I closed it and all my previous commands are gone. So it seems like Nix version is still in place, but I'm not able to get into Plutus apps.
Do an ls for us.
LS. I don't know what LS means.
Oh, just on the command line, right? ls.
Oh.
And then press enter, right? And so the reason it can't find a Plutus apps directory is that directory isn't saved here, but I see PPBL 2023 over to the right.
Okay. Oh, okay.
See that? Maybe that's the directory where you put Plutus apps. So let's do cd space PPBL 2023. And then do another ls to list the files in that directory.
Oh.
Okay, and there's Plutus apps. So now we can cd into Plutus apps.
Oh.
Okay, before we run Nix shell here, run git status. Good. And so you can see, this is what I was checking for. You see how it says head detached at v 1.2.0. That's good. That means you checked out the appropriate branch. And so from here, we should be able to run. And I heard you say that Nix develop didn't work yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have two computers that I try these things on, and on one of them, Nix Develop is working, and on the other, it's not. And I don't know why, and it's pissing me off. But we're gonna hope so. I hope we get some answers to that one. But for now, as it says in module 101, we're at this kind of in-between stage. Nix is in transition. And right now, Nix shell still works. But if you run it successfully, you'll see a little warning message that says it's deprecated, okay? For now, we can ignore that message. Everything works. And as soon as we have clear answers to really making sure how to get Nix Develop working reliably, that's going to be really exciting. And just when I got into Nix Develop, I was like, you know what? I can see some nice things about this. So that's something that we're all on the cutting edge. If you're brand new to Cardano development, welcome, you're brand new. Mix, thank you. Looking forward to hearing about that one. Okay, so actually, do you mind continuing to share, Harsha? Because
yeah,
let's
for sure,
let's see if we can get this running. And this is totally what we want to accomplish at these live coding sessions. Run Nix-shell for us. And if this has already worked, it shouldn't take too long, right? This is the step that takes a long time, the first time you run it. Let's see if it can make pretty quick work here. And while we wait for this, if anybody else has questions, just be sure to chime in. Okay, segmentation fault. This is covered in the documentation. And that's right, Demi, there's also a Docker image, right? So people can bypass this entirely if you want to use Docker. But in that case, it's the same message as using Demeter. You're relying on a Docker container that somebody else made, right? And do that if you want to, but if you want full control, learning how to run this locally is worth it. Harsha, do you have the module 101 open in a browser right now?
I do, yes. Let me open that.
So this segmentation fault is pretty common. And I found a solution to this just by searching for this error in the IOHK technical Discord. And you can see, like, in your browser, you should see GHC don't something. Here, I'll find the link for you. I'm going to drop into the chat. Try this command instead.
Oh, okay, this one, yes.
And I'm also dropping into the chat. Here's the direct link to the module we're working on right now. All right. Now, I haven't had time to look up exactly what this GC don't GC1 flag is and why it fixes the segmentation fault. So in the spirit of project-based learning, if anybody has figured that out or is looking for a little rabbit hole to dive down for a little while, I would love to have a good answer to include in our course as to precisely what that GC don't GC1 is doing for us, okay? All right, now if this is the first time you're doing this is actually gonna take a while right now, maybe a half hour. Okay, oh, wait, let's see. Oh, good, okay. This is great too. This is also a common error. And there's a way to update your Nix config so that the extra experimental features flakes is already set up, okay? And we can add that to the documentation. Jeff, I agree. But instead of changing your Nix config file right now, watch this. Just press the up arrow to get the last command you just used. Press space, and then copy and paste everything in those single quotes, -- extra experimental features flakes. Not that one, on the line above, The one where it says extra experimental
Oh.
features. Yeah, all of that. Just copy that and paste it to this command. And so this, the reason I want you to see this is for everybody. If you don't have flakes enabled in your Nix config, and we can look at that next, you can always just set this flag every time you run a Nix shell. Okay, the way to not have to use this is to update your Nix config, but also we can just throw this flag there, and let's try that. So we saw how long it took to get to that error a moment ago. We should see that we bypassed that error this time, but let's see what else happens. Okay, what does this one say? Okay. All right. Yeah, Jeff, you've seen this one?
Yeah, it pretty much just means there's not like an ARM binary for something.
Okay. Okay, so excellent. This was a big sticking point in the last iteration of our course. Do you have a fix for this one?
I think no, it depends on the package, like stuff, or well, so I can find the thing from my Nix config that says something like it's like a list of systems to try, but that'll only tell it to run the binary anyway. Some of them will still fail if they actually need M1 support. But I'll look for that though.
There. Now, I don't know if all the answers are here. I'm just going to drop a link into the chat. I don't have an M1 computer to test this, so I don't understand these problems because I haven't gotten my hands on them. Okay. But I know that other people have worked through this. There is an organization called the Armada Alliance that is working on M1 architecture and just other and on other devices that rely on this. There may be some resources here. I want to look through this a little more closely. And then there were some. It's Nix's garbage collector. It tells Nix to skip. Okay. That makes logical sense. Thanks, Roberto. Hey, James. And I need to look up, there were some students who made some progress on the M1 Nix install in the last iteration of the course. And Harsha, let me circle back when I find those resources. Okay.
Yep.
Extra platforms config option. So that's another flag like enabling flakes, Jeff? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think it can go in your .config/nix/nix.conf, but I forget because I'm not on the MacBook right now.
Right.
But yeah, and I can't remember if it's extra, that's if Linux is the extra thing you need or if Darwin is the extra thing you need. Yeah.
This is great. Now, I would love to have a clear, one-page step-by-step guide for people to get Nix shell running on an M1 device. And so, Harsha, if you figure it out, be sure to share. So we got you up to the step, but we didn't successfully get through the step of getting Nix shell running. But I wanted to take just a minute here to show you what happens next, just so you don't have to wait on the next step after you get through there successfully. I'm going to share my screen for just a moment here. Sorry, this took a moment. Okay. So I have the same thing, right? I have my Nix config set up so we can come back around to that, but I happen to also use the GC1 command. And I did a system level install of Nix. Oh, Juan's got something that's probably helpful. That looks really good in the chat right there. Nice. So because I did a system level install on this device, I have to use sudo to get my Nix shell running. And I know that's for some people, that's an absolute never, don't do that. But on this device, I've been just experimenting with this approach, okay? So for me, the command is gonna be sudo gc don't gc, garbage collector, that makes sense. And then I can say Nix shell. And I haven't been able to get Nix develop working yet on this device, but this should work for me. And this doesn't take long because I've already done it for the first time. All right, and this is the key thing for everybody to know, you know, the first time, and this happens every time I upgrade Plutus app. So I'm on V120 right now, okay? And if Plutus upgrades to V130, it'll take me a long time the next time I want to do this, okay? I get this deprecation message. I think it's beautiful that the date is the same as the date Plutus PBL launched. We must be doing something right for the stars to align like that. But now that I'm in Nix shell, now I still have to navigate to the directory where I want to run the REPL. All right, this is the critical thing to recognize. If I just go to my PBL directory and I run Cabal REPL here, I hope I get an error. Okay, it opens up the REPL because I have Nix set up well, but this is not the one I want. Okay, so I'm going to press Control D to exit this. And then I'm going to CD into the PPBL 2023 Plutus template. And this is where I want to be able to run Cabal REPL. This is another step that will take a while the first time you do it. Okay, but you can see that only took a moment for me because it's already been done the first time. And if you can see the always succeeds.compiler prompt at the bottom of the page, now you know that everything is working. Anybody have any questions at this step right here? Yeah. There were some headaches and there were some tears for a lot of us doing this for the first time. And I just want to say, you know, it's probably been a year and a half since I first got this working. I'm so glad I did. Okay. And if you have the hardware that's capable of running this, I really recommend getting through the tough parts. Because once you have this on your own device, now you're free to experiment with writing contracts quickly. And I can sketch out ideas much faster this way than any other option right now. Juan, thank you for this research. This looks great. Should we take a quick look at the Nix config file? I press Control D to leave the REPL, and then I press Control D to leave my Nix shell. Okay, so I left GHCI. Here, let me move the screen share a little bit. All right, so I left GHCI right here by pressing Control D, and then I exited from the Nix shell. And now I'm just back in my Linux terminal. Now, on my device, and I think this is the default, I have at the root level a Nix directory, I think. Yeah. Hold on. Where's the Nix config file? I can't remember it off the top of my head. There it is. No, that's not it. I think it's ETC, and that has a Nix in it. There we go. There it is. Okay, so I'm in the directory etc/Nix right now, and I followed the default instructions on this device when I set this up. Okay. So unless you change it from the default, this is what you'll have. And if I look at this Nix config file, cat is just in bash, it shows the contents of a file. Okay. So cat Nix config is just going to show you what's in that file. And for me, I have the IOHK caches right here. More on that in just a moment. And then I have this extra experimental features. This is exactly the flag that Harsha just sent on the command line, right? And I just have that set to equals Nix command flakes. So now I don't have to use that tag every time I start up a Nix shell. Okay. On the topic of the caches, does anybody know this part? This used to be emphasized very clearly in the Plutus apps documentation, and it's no longer emphasized with the newest versions of Plutus apps. And so what I'm wondering is if this step is still necessary. Okay, if it is, we need to put it into the documentation in the course. But if it's not necessary, that's great. That's just another step towards a more convenient setup where you don't have to take this extra step. Is anybody aware of the latest developments there? Our team is looking at that, and I'm really curious. Let me try to find answers and add that to the official docs in the course. But in the immediate term, if you start to run Nix shell from Plutus apps and it takes, more than an hour or so, it may be that you need to complete this step. So what I'm going to do for now is just take the contents of my Nix config file. I'll drop it in the Gimbal Labs Discord, and I'll add a note to the course with my setup right here. And then this is also where, for example, if you're on an M1 and you see Juan's screenshot right here, this is exactly where these lines would be added. Okay, you'd want to open up your Nix config file in whatever text editor you want and add those two lines, system equals and extra platforms equals, and see if that works. To Demi's question in the chat, he says, is v1.2.0 the latest version for Plutus apps? Yes, this is the latest version. The provided template, I think will work with version 1.1.0. And at our smart contract gladiator sessions on Fridays, we're still using v1.1.0 for now. Okay. But let's go to a browser for a moment and take a look at the Plutus apps repo. So on GitHub, you can see this is Plutus apps. And if you look at releases over here, you can always find the latest release. And that's what we see at the top of the page, v1.2.0. Okay. This gets us into a really deeper question about what Nix is doing for us and what Plutus really is. Because think about this. And if you follow along with module 101, you've started to see this concept that a Plutus script can be used to build a Cardano address. Okay. And you're going to see that directly in module 102 next week. All right. But just at a really high level, we want you to understand this critical concept. To make a wallet, you can make a verification key, also known as a public key, and from that, you can derive an address. In the very same way, you can use a Plutus script to derive an address, right? And in both cases, you're just creating a new location on the Cardano blockchain where UTXOs can be stored, okay? This raises an interesting question. If I made a key pair or a mnemonic phrase 2 years ago, I could still be using it today without any difference, right? It's still the exact same keys and I can still use it to sign off on transactions in my wallet. But what about a Plutus script that was made a year ago, right? We're on Plutus version 1.2.0 now. What if I made a Plutus script and derived an address from it a year ago on some much earlier version of the Plutus apps framework, right? Will it still be valid? And this is a really important thing to recognize. No matter where your Plutus script comes from, some earlier version of Plutus, right? Or the latest version, either way, it can always be used to create a Cardano address. And every new version of both Plutus and the Cardano node itself has backwards compatibility for all Plutus scripts that came before. Okay. However, it may be hard to recreate the exact same Plutus script, right? So if I built something a year ago on an old version of Plutus and I want to use the same exact code right now, but I use a newer version of Plutus apps, it's possible that I will get a slightly different CBOR string when I compile my code. And if I wanted to recreate exactly the same thing as a year ago, I would have to make sure to be using the version of Plutus apps that I was using back then. Okay. The good news is that once you've built something, it's always going to work, right? The bad news is if you lose an old Plutus script, it might be almost as hard as losing your private keys, right? You're going to have to go through and figure out, God, what the heck Plutus apps version was I using? And where's the code for that, right? It is reproducible, but you got to know the exact constraints of how you built that thing. I hope that context makes sense and isn't too overwhelming to anybody. Does that raise questions for anyone? I can't tell if that made any sense at all, but I, you know, in general, at these live coding sessions, it's really good for us to have the chance to talk about some of these, like, these deeper things that might be hard to express in a short video, but give you some of the deeper dive to start thinking about. Okay, so the key thing we wanted to look at today, and we have a little bit more than a half hour left for this session, is just this question: what is Plutus? Let me jump over to the course.
James,
Dan.
before you answer that one,
Yep.
what is a Nix flake when it's at home?
Good. Yeah, I should have come prepared with the answer to that question. Off the top of my head, I don't have a short definition of a flake for you. But it's similar to it has some things in common with a package that you could install via, like an NPM package that you could install via Node.js, right? But it's more than that. It's specifying the location and the recipe for building something. I need a better answer to that. I wish Alex is not here. Alex has been going really deep into using flakes, and we are starting to see IOHK lean on flakes a bit more. And that might be why the binary caches are de-emphasized, because I think they're using flakes in their place. But I haven't had a chance to process all that information into like a digestible response yet. Let me open call for people to provide a concise definition and use case for flakes. Would love support. Jeff says it's a function from deterministic inputs and map a system of purposes. Right, so it's saying this must come from this source, and there can't be any variables there, right? That would be good for reproducibility. That makes sense. Yeah, I need to understand the role of flakes better. And I got to be honest, my head has been in these first few modules for the last few weeks, but I'm excited to come up for air and look at flakes more closely with everybody. It's a relief that it's complicated.
Sorry, I distracted you.
No,
Carry
this
on.
is great though. I mean, this Nix is really interesting because it feels opaque. And Juan, see you soon. But I'm still an apprentice when it comes to Nix. But every time I understand something new about it, I'm like, oh, I could see why you would build it that way, right? It's a whole operating system based on just functional, right? Functional inputs and outputs. And so as you start to see like why these things exist, it's pretty cool how it all fits together. I just haven't built my own mental model for flakes yet. Right, James, it's the flake, the file, we put the dependencies in. We could test that hypothesis and take a look. I want to do a little research on flakes and call to action. If anybody can bring back a definition of flakes tomorrow, that would be really exciting. And I'll try to do the same and see what we can come up with for tomorrow's live coding. But I wanted to zoom in for just a moment on the high level approach that we've taken in module 101, right? Where it's not just about Nix and Plutus TX, which is covered in learning targets 3 and 4. We also have this ability to talk about writing Plutus validators in other languages, okay? And so I just wanted to zoom in on this part, this what is Plutus question for anybody. And we wanted to open the module by really getting people to think about what is Plutus in the first place. After reading through this bit right here, does anybody have any questions about how these different pieces fit together?
I guess I don't know if this is kind of like a half put together thought of a question, but I've had a lot of trouble picturing what the actual like Plutus core for a given like I guess validator function would look like. I've tried to look it up a few places and it's like it's some sort of lambda calculus and there's you can kind of see a few examples of them, but they're like I couldn't find anywhere where you can like take a validator and look at the n-type Plutus core from it. Like I might have missed it.
Jeff, I'm glad you brought that up. I was scrambling when putting the finishing touches on this module to provide a simple way to decode the CBOR to the Plutus core where you can see the lambda functions. But I couldn't find a way that felt like easy enough to be worth sharing for now. But that's definitely something we're going to look at soon. Mix has built a couple of functions that can show you that version of Plutus core. But you're exactly right. I think it's worth it for everybody to see that. And let's see if we can, maybe that's another thing to throw on the agenda for tomorrow, is at least passing our eyes over what you're describing, this Plutus core where you can see these lambda functions. I've done that a couple times. It's good to see it once. And the truth is, you really don't need to look at it very often, right? So let's see if we can build a little lesson around that. But at the end of the day, how do people feel about this concept that Plutus core is just a string of characters that are, you know, meaningless to the naked eye? How does that feel?
For me, it's no different than assembler. Your mnemonics in assembler translate into ones and zeros. It's just a higher level representation of the ones and zeros that make the program.
Mm-hmm. In the summary here, you can look at the final results from lessons 3, 4, 5, and 6. This is it, right? And yes, this can be decoded. You can actually go to, so I mean, one thing you can do, I'm going to show you something that I wish was more helpful. This is a CBOR decoder. And so I could just take this CBOR right here and I can drop it here and decode it. No, hold on. It's that one. Yeah, it's this. All right. So this is actually a little bit interesting, but it's not quite readable yet. There's a better version of this that will get mixed to show us that shows you what's going on here. But it's kind of interesting. There's a little bit of descriptive stuff here. I can read the word tag and I could read the word bytes, for example. And I could do the same thing with this one from Aiken. See what that looks like. But there's tools in some of, why didn't that work? I'm not going to try to troubleshoot that right now. But so this is okay, but this is better decoded with some of the tools that we'll have a chance to look at soon. But this is the really high level concept, okay? this idea of having shareable code here. Some people refer to the Plutus contract part of a Cardano application as being more like hardware than software. Okay. It needs to be built once and well so that it keeps working when we try to use it for all sorts of different applications. Okay. And this concept is going to make even more sense once we're actually encoding some real logic in our Plutus validators, right? This one is always succeeds. It always just allows us to unlock anything, no matter who we are, from a given contract address. And you'll have a chance to look at that next week, okay? But especially once we start to have some real logic in our contracts, that contract, like I said, can be thought of as a piece of hardware, almost, right? That you just then need to build applications around it that use the rules that are encoded, but not changing right there, okay? Now, why is this relevant? Well, if you're going to build a decentralized application on Cardano, you're going to need at least one and usually multiple Plutus scripts. As we will see, most applications don't have just one contract running. They run a set of interconnected contracts. And once those contracts are written, they can be represented like this. Usually, the CBOR is much longer than this, right? You can see the Aiken example is a bit longer, but once there's actual logic embedded, this string of characters, it might be a couple hundred characters, right? It'll be way, way longer, but it's still, at the end of the day, just a string of characters. And even if you don't know how to write Plutus code, right, via any of the languages that we're talking about, I could send this to you and you could use it to build the non-Plutus part of an application. And this is a critical thing, okay? After everything we do to write some Cardano smart contracts, no matter how we do it, you can pass these things around. And so one way to use Plutus is just to make friends with somebody who knows how to write it. Because maybe you're the front-end developer who doesn't need to know the Plutus part, but you do need to know how to build the UX and UI that's going to allow people to interact with that contract. And this is going to be a really important concept as we move forward, okay? And if I look at the course outline again for just a moment, next week when you're building your first transactions, you're going to use these Plutus scripts from this week, but you're not going to have to be able to write them yourself. We're just going to grab them, right? And when we start to build the front end template, same thing. You're not going to have to write your own Plutus scripts. You're going to use some that have already been compiled and learn about the role those play. And only after we have the chance to really start using these things, and this is the Plutus core, once again, right? If I go to the top, this course is really about Plutus core. We're going to show you ways to write contracts that compile to Plutus core. And maybe you'll want to go really deep into that. That's great if you do, okay? But maybe you're more interested in playing a different role on a development team, and you're much more interested in using these scripts, okay? There's going to be room for both. And when we talk about specializing later in the course, you don't have to specialize in everything. Dan, what do you think?
I was just thinking about the scripts. Would it be, how do I word this without sounding like a complete pillock? Is it safe to liken a Plutus script to a Haskell function in as much as given the same input, it will always give the same output. So for example, with a validator script, if you provide it with the right information, it will always give you a yes. And if you don't, it will give you a no. So in terms of that, it's very much like a programming function. And then you can string scripts together to create much more complex functionality. Excellent.
Okay, so this is an absolutely critical question. Okay, so first things first, yes, a validator is a function, right? And it can only return two things, true or false, yes or no. Okay, yes, you can unlock UTXOs at the address that was derived from this and only this script, right? Or no, you can't. Okay, so in this sense, it's like a function. It's like a functional version of assigning key, right? Instead of just saying, I have this key, we're saying you have to meet these rules to unlock here. And once you see this, it's going to make a lot more sense, right? Once we start to use these things next week in actual transactions, this stuff is going to start to really come together. Oh, hold on. You said I wanted, so that's a starting point. Can you say your question again? Sorry, you got me thinking about like three things at once.
Sorry, the main part of the question was you can string scripts together to provide more functionality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So the only way to use a Plutus script is to build a transaction that either can or can't unlock some UTXOs, some tokens. And if you're unfamiliar with the term UTXO, don't worry, we're going to cover that in depth and by example as we go. Okay. So first and foremost, a transaction can unlock tokens from multiple contracts in the very same transaction. I could say, okay, this contract address has these tokens and that contract address has those tokens, and I would like to unlock from both of those in a single transaction. That's fine. So that's one example of kind of like a parallel unlocking, right? It's possible to write a Plutus validator that says you can only unlock from this contract if you are sending some tokens from it onto some other contract, right? And now we kind of have this sequential ordering of contracts where value moves from one thing to the next thing, and you can chain as many as you want to together. And that's a critical feature of Plutus, is having the ability for contracts to be aware of each other. And you must pay to, you'll start to see those words, must pay to script, right? You can only unlock here if you are paying to some next one, or if you're paying back to the script itself, right? So we're able to chain these things together and have them working in concert, okay? Finally, this piece, like, what does the Plutus script actually do? And Dan, you already said it, and I repeated it, right? It can only say true or false, yes or no, you can unlock. But let's think about that for an extra moment here. There's some debate as to whether or not the term smart contract is a worthwhile term. Does it accurately describe the thing, right? Now, I'm not going to rehash the entire debate dating back to Ethereum, but I've come to believe that actually on Cardano, the way these contracts work seems to me to be actually somewhat similar to the way contracts work in the legacy world as it currently exists, right? Like a legal contract. What does a legal contract stipulate? It says what I can and can't do. And it also might say what the penalties are for breaking rules and that kind of thing, right? But it lays out the rules of engagement. Now, can the piece of paper, the contract itself, can that contract itself come after me? No, it's a piece of paper. Of course it can, right? Somebody has to take that piece of paper and do something with it in order for that contract to have any impact on the world, right? Now, once they do, any number of things could happen to me, right? If I break a contract, who knows what the human consequences for that are going to be, right? It's written there, and sometimes people stick to it and sometimes they don't, but it really depends on what people do with the actual contracts after it's written. And a Plutus contract is the very same thing. I write in Plutus TX in Haskell, or in Aiken, or in PluTS, or in Helios, or in any of these other languages that are starting to come out right now. I write the rules, I publish them to a form that looks like this, and only then does the real action start. This is only telling me what I can and can't do. Now I have to build up an application around it that would be kind of synonymous to the people in the world taking a paper contract and acting on it, right? I need to transact. I need to act on these contracts in order to actually use them to say what I can and can't do. I wonder if that makes sense to everybody, but that's kind of how I've been explaining it to myself. And when I hear people say they don't like the term smart contract, I think I beg to differ at this point when it comes to the way, really what a contract does on Cardano. What do you think? Any holes in that logic? Are there different ways that we could try to say it as we explain this to each other? Plutus is the language where the on-chain code is written, Plutus TX, okay? And then we compile it to the Plutus core, which is what we then are able to use to write our applications. Erez, what do you think?
Yeah, hey, I have a question about looking at the part. This is just to go back a little bit, but where it says where you're looking at the different environments, like between the meter run and local environment. And I noticed that the first two, they have the same CBOR hex, but then the other ones are different. And maybe I missed it. I don't know, maybe you mentioned it. I had to, it cut out for a little for me, but.
No, that's such an important observation, right? Yeah, why are these two CBOR strings the same, whereas these ones are different? Anybody want to try to answer the first question? Why are these ones the same?
Some compilers give a different result because they are less optimized.
Right, so these ones are given the different result, and that's actually really interesting for us to look at. But there's a much simpler reason these are the same. They came from the same place, okay? Both of these are the always succeeds contract in Plutus TX. And whether we look at lesson 3, right, where you're pulling the Plutus template into your Demeter instance, or if we look at lesson 4, where you're running the Plutus template locally, either way, it's the same code, okay? So whether we use Demeter or a local environment, we're using this repo right here, and the code looks like this either way, okay? So to answer Jeff's question, It's not even using true right here. It's using unit, which is interpreted as always true. Okay. There's actually ways to make this, you can write the Plutus TX always succeeds code in slightly more complicated ways that maybe make it look a little bit more illustrative, but this is as easy as it gets. And we're not actually going to use built-in data much at first, although later in the course, when we get into the really deep Plutus lectures, you'll see how sometimes it's worth it at the very end to refactor your code to once again use built-in data. It can lead to better performance and lower cost, but it can be harder to write the logic in an understandable way for the first time. Okay, so yeah, so the first two are the same because they are sourced from the same code. Okay, whereas Aiken and Plutus, not only are they using different code, they're starting from different languages before being compiled. Okay. Now, one challenge, and I promised that we would look a little closer at this issue tomorrow at live coding, and so we can pick up here tomorrow. But a challenge for everybody is to try to write an always succeeds validator in some of these other languages, or even Plutus TX, right? Try to write an always succeeds validator that results in a different CBOR string. Is it possible to get this Aiken string a little bit shorter, at least? Is it possible eventually to get it to compile to the exact same thing? Why or why not? And same question with Plutus. That's an adventure that people can go on if you want to, but it's a cool thing to explore, just to try to get different hexes to work here. And then once again, I want to repeat, next week you're going to start to use these Plutus scripts as we start to build transactions. What other questions have come up? Anybody get through the Aiken or Plutus tutorials? And do you have any preferences yet between these three options?
Yeah, I like the JavaScript version because it's good with matching with mesh. So you have one environment.
I don't know if anybody's heard the rumors yet, but they're true. The Plutus team and the mesh team are working closely together to really level up the experience. We've got some very exciting, if you're familiar with mesh already, the best is still to come, because they've done some deep work starting from scratch in making it possible to write and use contracts in an even more streamlined way. So those changes are not even released yet. And this is something that you're going to hear throughout this course, right? We're like in this journey now, and the tools that we're using are going to change while you're learning how to use them because they're still in development. So I hope you're here for a good adventure, because it's going to be wildly exciting, but also potentially exasperating, but we're in this together.
Oh, James. Is it easy to set up a Cardano node on Nix? Because it looks like you could do it with an easy command, and yeah, they do it a lot. They use it a lot, but I think that is something that is missing. Or
yeah, this is coming up next week. So there's one more piece of local environment setup that you can opt into if you want to. You don't have to set up a Cardano node locally because you can use Demeter for this. And once you start using different front-end libraries, you'll see that you can query the blockchain in a lot of different ways. Welcome back, Mix. Okay, but yes, what we will recommend to you next week is, hey, listen, if your computer can handle it and you've got the bandwidth, it's worth it to try to set up a Cardano node locally. And we're not going to use Cardano CLI for everything. What you're going to see is that everything Cardano CLI can do, you can build transactions the same way from a mesh-based or a Lucid-based front end, for example. But still, in Module 102, we are going to look at building transactions with Cardano CLI, because what I've seen is that it's helpful for people just to do that a couple times, because it helps you really understand what a transaction is and what a UTXO is. Okay, so this is kind of like that. You know, imagine being like a 10-year-old again when you were learning multiplication for the first time and the teacher just made you practice your multiplication facts. We're going to do just a little bit of that with Cardano CLI, just so you can build up a little bit of an understanding of how transactions work. But we're not going to stay there for too long. We're going to try to move past that as soon as folks have seen just a little bit. But Martin, to your question, when it comes to installing Cardano node, there's a couple of different options. Here's obtaining it, right? So you see, we can build it from source. You can simply download the executable. These are just ready to go. And I recommend this for a quick start, okay? And there's Docker, which we're not going to cover in this course, but is always available to people who are comfortable with Docker and want to use it. But let's look at building from source. No, that just took me back up the page. Here, there it is. When I go here, you can see there's two options for doing so. One is to use Cabal and one is to use Nix. Okay, so if you do want to go the deeper Nix route, it's absolutely worth it to follow this documentation and really understand it. Personally, oh, look, maybe this is a definition of flakes. Oh, that's kind of nice. I find that the installing from source using Cabal is a really nice way to learn how Haskell works and how a Haskell environment works. But it could take a little while. It could take some time to run through all these steps. But if you do, I promise you will learn a little bit about how Haskell works. Has anybody here done the Nix, the building with Nix approach?
I haven't, but I just installed Nix like 3 weeks ago, and I'm building a new node now, as I mentioned before. It's actually, I'm having some network issues in my new place, so the node's the easy part, but I was gonna struggle with trying to figure out how to get it going in Nix. So I'll be in that direction pretty soon.
For anybody who doesn't know, James is an OG stake pool operator. And so if you know, as we start to play with Cardano node, if you are able to install this on your computer, sync it up and run it, you're only one step away from being a stake pool operator. You will have a copy of the blockchain, you will have a node running. And once that's true, I shouldn't say one step, there's not too many more steps past that to create and register a stake pool. Okay. And so if people have questions about that, you can lean on James anytime for those sorts of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on it now, guys.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I know that Steve here has some ideas for a stake pool operator PBL as well. So once we finish building Plutus PBL, there's some other places we might go. Professor Mix, what you got?
James, everyone, I just wonder that is it possible to run a stake pool on testnet? Like, is it possible? I'm just asking. I don't know. Is it possible to run a stake pool on testnet as a practice and then going through same process on mainnet? Or no, we have to go with directly mainnet.
Prefer to start there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, highly recommended. Try it on a test net first.
Great.
Yeah, I'd really, and I know this is not anytime soon that we can think about this, but I'd really like us to think about running our own test nets as part of PBL, because there's not enough of them. And when they both crash, you see the whole community kind of get stopped. And I think over the long haul, larger communities should be running their own test nets because they've got their own parameters. They've got their own tools that they're building. And, depending on IOG to run these test nets is, it's a point of failure. It's centralization.
Yeah, I would like for that to be, if we are happy with what we build in PPBL 2023 and we can keep using it, adding to that, running our own test network in like 2024, I think should be a high priority goal. That's a really, really good way for people to learn about network resilience and some of these other skills. Shout out to my single SPOs. Thanks, James.
And it's also an income potential, right? Imagine, people somewhere wanting to build something and they need somebody to test it for them. Why couldn't we do that, teach and 100%. Make some money at the same time?
100%. And so now we together, we're just getting to know each other. I know we're at time, so I want to wrap up. I'll hand it to Roberto for last words in just a moment. But as we all get to know each other, especially if you're new here to Gimbal Labs, one of the guiding principles here is to create space for people to run with their ideas. Okay, so if the concept of thinking through, hey, what would that really entail to include spinning up our own testnet in a PBL course, if that's an idea that really lights you up, or fill in the blank, right? And you see it's not happening yet, you're in the right place. And I hope that people can find ways to do the things that they're most excited about and share those things with others. Roberto, take us home.
Maybe this is not such a good wrap up, but I was talking to a stake pool operator, and he said that there are no real incentives for stake pool operators to run testnets, despite the fact that it's an infrastructure cost. Is that something that can be changed?
We would have to talk about the last 200 years of history to sufficiently address that question. We're
What
living.
would happen if they shut it down?
Yeah, what would happen? Exactly.
What would happen?
Yeah, no, we live in a world where it's hard to build a financial case for shared infrastructures. And this is very much true in the legacy world. And we're seeing the same thing on Cardano. And it's fascinating. And there's some work to do ahead of us. Yeah, we need to find a way, I think, probably to incentivize testnet operators so that there can be a testnet so that people can learn how to use these things. But the moment you start thinking about that question, you start to run into some of the technical reasons why that hasn't happened yet. And I hope that together in this course, we can get there, right? Like, let's start learning. Then let's find out what's the discrepancy between where we are right now and our desired state. But as we understand the technical constraints a bit more, we can really chew on those problems in a more informed way and eventually maybe have a breakthrough. Maybe somebody sitting in this meeting right here is going to have the lightning bolt breakthrough that solves the problem of incentivizing a pre-prod testnet, for example. That's hope. I hope that that's one of the things that happens in the months and the years to come. James, were you going to say something? Okay. Now we'll talk a lot more about legacy infrastructure. I have a list of things. I'm sure you all do too. But isn't that why we're here, right? If the world was working perfectly for everybody right now, maybe we wouldn't even need a blockchain in the first place, because we would just be happy living in the perfect world that we lived in, right? But these tools were made because some people noticed some problems and they thought they could do something about it, starting with Bitcoin and on through today. And it's still very much a story that's in process. So let's find real problems and let's see if there's anything we can do about them.
James, real quick one. Does the other James have an idea of what it actually costs in electricity and bandwidth to run a stake pool? Because I'd quite happily run a testnet node.
Yeah, sorry. I've been running since the very beginning. And so I was one of the ITNers. We were like crashing these nodes and building them back up and crashing them. The code was changing like minute to minute, it seemed like in the very beginning, but when we finally got them up, I think I was generating like 20 cents a day or something like that to run them. And but you know, at that point it was just the cause. It was the, you know, why we're doing it. Now I'm buying more and more hardware to run independently. At first, starting in the cloud was a reasonable thing to do. And so you were definitely running in the negative. There's no bones about it. You were running in the hard negative. It had to be something you wanted to do. And then, you know, when price started to shift and delegations started to come on board, things got a little better. I think there is a financial incentive to run a node as long as, you know, we keep scaling up. But right now, these are the difficult times. It really is the people that want to make a change in the world, and we're putting in more work than we're getting in return, I think is where we're at. And James, I totally think we should discuss like multi-layered incentives for full, you know, capability or functionality, you know, like maybe even, you know, proof of hardware, you know, proof of stake, like building in part of the infrastructure that supports development is part of the key component that allows development to continue. It was one of the creative benefits that I really appreciated with Cardano, having a treasury to always fund development. It's brilliant, because before that we had seen blockchains crash because they kept running out of funding. And so it solved that unique issue. And Cardano solves a lot of issues that way. And so I really think maybe even designing in maybe small holes that we're seeing now, like we do need test nets. We need reliable test nets. How do we motivate and build that into the ecosystem? Those are interesting conversations that we might want to have in the future. But as far as running a stake pool right now, it is mostly from the heart. And I know there's enough people out there that can do it. Now I'm an American, so I'm totally centric to that concept. There are other people in other countries, if they have access to the hardware, could probably do pretty well, making enough money, you know, to live off of it. But the nodes, as of late, they don't produce, you know, it's in the hundreds of dollars. It's not paying bills or anything like that. Hope that answers the question.
It's not proof of work, Dan, right? So like James is saying, you need a big enough hard drive to store the ledger, right? But once you have the storage space, it's not much a higher cost than just leaving a computer on all the time, right? Because you're just validating, but you're not running like a GPU to do these things. I run Gimbal Pool on a cloud server just as a kind of as a demo of what's possible. I use Roberto Morano's Dandelion infrastructure to do it. And I use a small provider, and the bill hasn't hit $100 per month yet for an efficient enough cloud service, right? Now, should I be running a stake pool in the cloud? Not ideal, right? But it's more for the purpose of kind of showing it. And I promise it's not on AWS, it's on a tiny provider, just for kind of the show of it.
Well, if someone wants to give me a helping hand, I'll quite happily set up a pre-prod node, because my computer runs 24/7. It's solar powered, so it's not costing me anything. The sun shines. While that's still happening, we'll all still be okay.
As long as you still have sun. Now let's anybody who's interested, let's organize a subgroup that can get together and just start learning pre-prod stake pool operation. Okay, I think that would be a great exploration. And let's raise that topic tomorrow. If anybody would feel really excited to jump into that sooner than later, there's no reason for a group of people just to start getting together, doing it, documenting it. That's great.
That sounds really cool. I'd be into it too.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
Well, the incentives can be run a stake pool on testnet and get a token on mainnet, like an initial, like an ISPO, but for a stake pool. If you want, like, if you want your stake pool on mainnet to be included on a program or something, okay, then run a stake pool on testnet and prove it, and then you will be included in that token offering or something. Yeah. Maybe we can create a bounty for it, right?
This is all connected to eventually paying for Dandelion as well, right? With this, for anybody who doesn't know, the other thing Gimbal Labs does parallel to PBL is we provide Dandelion infrastructure, and it's been a way harder job than we expected to, getting people to financially support it, whether that's from Catalyst or otherwise. But a lot of people use the free service. So we're looking at ways to build a tokenomics that helps people understand what that service is and its value, support it if they're able to. But this is all connected. Running a test net and running the additional services on Dandelion have a lot of things in common. Yeah, Jeff, that's a good point. All right, so I think we've sufficiently got our work cut out for us. As you can see, this often happens. Sometimes we go a few minutes over at live coding. I'll try to do my best to keep us to time, but sometimes I can't resist sticking around for a few extra minutes when some of these topics come up. So thanks to everybody who stayed over time. Same time, same place tomorrow.
Yep.
See you there.
Take care, guys. Thank you, James. Bye.
Cheers, everybody.